Welcome to another episode of Our Interesting Times. It is my pleasure to have John Adams back on the show. John returns to discuss, well, California. California, the Golden State. Of course, John is the co-host of the Hoaxbusters Call and also the Hoaxbusters Special Reports. He does those with Chris Kendall.
Part 2 of an interview with John Adams on California.
Many of us in the Midwest and back east had outwardly dismissed the Los Angeles Southland as nothing more than the home of movie stars and crazies, but in your heart of hearts you knew that California was a paradise. So for millions of Americans living in colder and more prosaic places, the ranch house served as a tangible connection to the good life. Abbreviated versions of May's long, low, rambling houses, modified for harsher climates and more limited budgets, began to appear in the Midwest. And, of course, California subdivisions soon after the war. At the other end of the country, Royal Barry Willis continued to proselytize for the American colonial. Willis had grown up in suburban Boston and was convinced that the basic simplicity of traditional New England houses provided handsome and efficient single-family residential models for burgeoning post-war suburbs. In addition to writing numerous articles for national magazines like Life and the Saturday Evening Post, Willis wrote 8 books in an easy-to-grasp graphic style with sketches interspersed with text and photos on how to manufacture these homes. Okay, so we're in the Cold War period. World War II and post-World War II time period. Let's think this out here. The two most popular homes at this time are a ranch house and a Boston colonial.
It's the Yankee Cowboy.
Is there any cultural wallpapering going on here?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we've got 1776 worldwide, basically. And we've got the Cowboys, the ranch house.
Mm-hmm.
This is being built into the culture. It's there for the imagery. It's there for the shaping of the mindset. It's there for the traditional aspects, the connections back to, back to earlier time periods of the like he says, the colonial. With, Boston and the founding fathers and all that type of stuff, that's all connected there. And then the ranch house connects you back to the rugged individual cowboy.
Mm-hmm.
The interesting thing about the Cliff May ranch house, and I think I may have pointed this out before, is the one thing that May did is he took the living room out of the front and put it in the back.
Mm-hmm.
And he said what that did was it gave privacy so that you didn't have people in your neighborhood looking in your window. Here's the thing, though. Like, the neighborhood that I currently live in, I have a big front window. In the last house that I lived in, my house was built in the 1920s. It had a big Moorish arch with a big front window.
Mm-hmm.
So in an earlier time period, and the house I live in right now is built in 1931. The house directly across the street from me has a big bay window as well. It was built around the same time period. So there once was a time period where people didn't mind if you looked in their front window.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, as you get into this Cold War, wartime thing, now you're building your living room in the back of the house.
This is isolating people, atomizing them, I guess.
Yes.
Same thing with like a bigger front yard where your house is set way off the street. So if you're on your front porch, you don't converse with your neighbor and things like yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And those type of things contributed to this atmosphere, One of the things that a lot of people, you read these accounts and whatnot, people complained about is in the suburbs it was isolating. It was hard to even get to know your neighbors. People didn't talk to each other like they did in other neighborhoods.
This was a function of suburbanization, because a lot of these people are coming from the formerly ethnic neighborhoods or enclaves where everyone goes to the same parish, and they have, they're usually all the same religion, and they're all the same ethnicity, so they've these things in common, so they talk to each other. These are sort of high trust communities, and this goes against sort of the zeitgeist of the age where everything's pro-integration. You have to mix. Everyone has to mix together, and that leads to atomization as well, as opposed to everyone loving each other. Actually, it's the exact opposite, and the evidence suggests that was the intention, was actually to further isolate and atomize society and make people to create conflict, rather, because a good I guess you could say a good arrangement or a good modus vivendi for these groups of people is to have their communities and respectable boundaries. But the social engineers thought the future was integration.
Absolutely. Yeah. I totally agree. So once again, he was pointing out in that book there that the proliferation of this idea came from, the ranch house, this isolating house came out of California, out of Sunset Magazine too, particularly, which interestingly enough, are you familiar with Sunset Magazine?
No, I'm not. Was it an architectural magazine or something?
No, it's like a lifestyle magazine.
Oh, okay.
Kind of.
Sunset Magazine. Is it still published?
I believe so. Yeah. I haven't read it in about 2 years or something, but I'm pretty sure it's still around. If it's not entirely full of advertising, like most magazines. But interestingly enough, at one time, Sunset Magazine had something to do with, what was it? I'd have to look it up. I'd have to Wikipedia, but I think it had to do with war propaganda.
Oh, well, you mean like Life magazine?
Yeah,
Time magazine.
It was something else. Until it became this kind of go-to thing for learning how to set up your house properly and your atomic housewares and all that type of stuff.
Telling you how to spend your money.
Oh yes, how to manage your prosperity, your aerospace prosperity here. You get into Hollywood here. One of the things Chris and I talked about on one of the last calls is how CGI was developed out of Caltech and JPL, and eventually made its way into the movies. And one of the interesting things, this would be for somebody with the idea who might be questioning what's out there beyond the atmosphere. All of the stuff that you see in the Cosmos series by Carl Sagan.
I remember it.
Yeah. Okay, that stuff is all CGI, early CGI. That's not real footage of the Voyager and all that stuff that they claim that they're using. All that. It's interesting because I'd have to get the actual quote here, but there's a good book about this. It's called Blue Sky Metropolis, written by Professor Peter J. Westwick, and he goes over this. He has an entire chapter on JPL and Hollywood, and basically at a certain point, if you're a coincidence theorist and that's kind of what Mr. Westwick would be. He would just be an academic, so he doesn't think he probably doesn't believe in conspiracies at all. He just thinks that, oh yes, CGI was basically used for this purpose of like trying to, kind of project what's going to happen in space once we get out there.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then all of a sudden, the CGI. I've talked about this before. I've got this NASA program. It's like from like 1988 or something. And, it's like a program that you get when you go to Cape Canaveral, like one of those full color photo things. And this is right around the time when they were putting out the IMAX theater.
Yeah. And
it's so funny because they show a full color photograph in this program of, they're showing off all the cool stuff that you get to do when you go to Cape Canaveral. And there's this full color photograph, and it's like, here, you can watch astronauts walking on the moon and on this huge IMAX theater screen. And then below it says, and here's the future of what we're going to be doing, once we get out there into the outer regions of space. If you look at what they're showing the people on the screen with the astronauts that are, out there in space allegedly doing the moonwalks, and then you see the CGI that's below it, what they're watching as to what the future is going to look like, it looks exactly the same. There is no difference between the two. And this is 1988 in this full color picture, and I crack up every time I see that picture. It's like, oh, you can't even tell the difference, So how do we even know there is a difference at all? Right. And so, anyways, this was all developed out of JPL in the first place. So it's like, I don't want to get off into this subject, but it's like, while you're developing this, these computer graphics that are being, you're developing it in the time period before anybody even knows what it looks like. Mm-hmm. Like, we don't even know what space looks like. We have these, photographs that come from Life magazine, which are very dubious in the 50s and 60s and whatnot.
You're saying you can't trust Life magazine to tell you about life? Yeah, we can trust Life magazine to tell you about what kind of life they're manufacturing for you to live in. And so it isn't until this time period that you get these images. And then once we get into the age of being able to, see these things on, in, movies or television shows or whatever. And Chris has done a great job of pointing this out, is that by the time you get into the 70s and 80s, the rendering process is more advanced. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, you're able to produce Carl Sagan's Cosmos series because you have computers with a higher rendering process by this time, to make it look as if, this idea of what we think of as space is, actually functioning. Yes.
So, with that in mind, I guess the point I'm making, and like I said, I didn't really want to get off into that.
Well,
that subject.
Look
it would be like if you didn't know what an apple looked like, and I said, Tim, here's what an apple looks like, and I showed you a picture of an orange.
Yeah.
Right? And now you go your entire life thinking that an apple looks like an orange. Well, that's what we got with space. Because the only reason we know what space looks like is because it's what they told us it looks like. And by the time they developed CGI at JPL, which they're saying, the only reason we did it was because we wanted to be able to do projections as to, what's going to happen, like think tank, like a think tank or something about space.
Yeah.
That's what they're claiming it's for, but then that's the same technology that they use to distribute it in the movie industry, in the TV industry. You see?
Well, yeah, I mean, look at if you want our expectation of space. How much of it was shaped by 2001: Space Odyssey, a movie?
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah, exact same thing. So the space industry is based out of Southern California. Like I said, 1/3 of aerospace engineers lived in Southern California, worked here. 40% of the space industry was based out of Southern California.
And you're saying that its close proximity to Hollywood is something we should consider. Well, wasn't NASA's first director coming out of the motion picture industry?
Yes, he was. Yes, he was. Yeah. So where JPL is, which it's interesting because it's built in a place called Devil's Canyon. Not making that up.
It's just another coincidence.
Yeah. So Devil's Canyon, which, that's Jack Parsons, of course, is a Satanist of some kind, along, a Crowleyan. What was there the Agape Lodge? Is that what it was called?
Yeah.
Yeah. So him and L. Ron Hubbard are, hanging out and trying to
get laid a lot, right?
Yeah. Having orgies and trying to create a star child allegedly and all this type of stuff.
I just imagine that as a pickup line. Will you have my moonchild at a bar?
Yeah. But his pickup line was his his pickup line was, yes, I am a rocket scientist.
Yes,
and I'm also a member of a secret society that has orgies trying to create a moonchild.
And L. Ron Hubbard could always say, "Hey, I have a big boat."
Yeah,
that's what.
Yeah, once again, the Church of Scientology is right there on Sunset Boulevard, right when you get off the 101 freeway. So the mothership right there. So this is all within proximity of Hollywood. Like you said, anybody can go out there and find out about the history of Jack Parsons. There's a book written on it called Sex and Rockets. And L. Ron Hubbard and whatnot.
Sometimes a rocket is just a rocket, right?
Well, it's interesting, the rocket in of itself. It's definitely, in my opinion, it's definitely a Freemasonic phallic symbol, and that's probably mainly its only function is to provide this type of provide a type of magic trick being played on everybody. So, like I said, this kind of proliferates through television, gets out into the culture. Like I mentioned before, I Dream of Jeannie, the Jetsons.
Where were some other ones? What was that one? I think I sent you the link, that TV show where these astronauts go back in time to dinosaur age. It's called Just in Time, or what was it? It was like a short.
Oh yeah. I remember that. Yeah. So there's no end to all this type of stuff. Whether it's
and it's basically it's just trying to get, it's like just a remake. It's called like Gilligan's Island going. It's just these formulaic shows, but the characters,
right?
It's like Skipper and Gilligan characters. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
But I like to fuse the dinosaur meme with the astronaut thing. I thought that was kind of funny of the show. This.
There's a lot of interesting stuff going on in the cultural background. Like I said, when we talked about the Kon-Tiki-spiracy episode, there's a lot of intertwining of like primitivism and then modernism. Mm-hmm. So you've got these shows that are in space. So you could be watching a show about space, and then the next thing it is you've got Gilligan's Island, where it's kind of this, primitive kind of modern primitive type thing. You've also got, like I said, something like Lost in Space, or The Man from U.N.C.L.E., or any of that type of stuff as kind of this space age atomic background. Like I said, I Dream of Jeannie, the Jetsons, and then something like the Flintstones is there to give you like this kind of I don't know, I don't even know what it would be, but it's kind of weird because the Flintstones is an interesting thing because it would be like on after the Jetsons, mm-hmm. and it's made by the same production company, but they're a modern Stone Age family, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
And so if you look at like the design of the layout of the houses and all that type of stuff, it's very atomic space age mm-hmm. looking, but it's in this prehistoric setting. It's very bizarre, but there is a purpose to all of this. There's a purpose behind all of this type of stuff. This merging of this imagery and this mindset, and it's on one hand you've got this full-blown modernism that we've all kind of gone into, the atomic age, and there's everything from your cars to your plates and your forks and your napkins have atomic imagery all over it. Cars are designed to take, to kind of look like rockets. Mm-hmm. There's even a car called a Rocket 88.
The tail fins, right?
Yeah, the tail fins, all that type of stuff. That's all designed. Anybody can go look that up. Tail fins on the Cadillacs and all those cars were designed to look like rocket ships on purpose. So it's providing this kind of thing, but at the same time, people are feeling the stress and the anxiety of kind of moving into this type of lifestyle, and so you simultaneously provide them this kind of primitive outlet. So you moved into the utopia where you have everything that you want to be and have everything that you could ever want, but at the same time, you're feeling isolated and constrained by the asphalt concrete jungle that you've moved into. So you provide, through tiki culture or through, something like the Flintstones, it's kind of this nostalgia for a more primitive life that's kind of provided as kind of a psychological outlet.
Yeah, and this is
strange.
This would follow the Gregory Bateson's weaponized anthropology and his wife, the anthropologist, but Simone Margaret Mead, who's Blue Lagoon, anthropology.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Free love of primitivism. Of course, this coincides with the nascent feminist movement, which is caused by largely engineered, but supported by the sort of the ennui you get in the middle class suburbia, free time and these things. At the same time, the Playboy culture is being promoted too, with of course, Playboy magazine, Hugh Hefner, and the culture is becoming more permissive. So the social fabric is being kind of slowly torn apart. Introduction of the birth control pill. This is the era of Vatican II. And, of course, the suburbia plays a big part in this because a lot of this social alchemy couldn't have been conducted if the people were in their traditional neighborhoods, living with extended families, identifying with the parish and these things. And now they're in suburbia, they're isolated, they're atomized.
Absolutely. And, you brought up Gregory Bates and Margaret Mead. Interestingly enough, on that same level, not of the same school of thought. But interestingly enough, another thing that Southern California was home to was the Frankfurt School.
That's right.
And not a lot of people know this, but if anybody wants to hear a really interesting interview that Chris and I did, you can go back to our archives and find the interview that we did with Dr. Erhard Bahr, a professor of German at USC. I kind of not in a bad way, but I may have misled him a little bit to get that interview. But very nice gentleman. I'm totally kidding. Yes, it was a great interview. He was probably just happy. He was probably happy that I was, the 19th person who read his book.
Yeah.
He wrote a book called Weimar on the Pacific.
Aha. Yes.
And it is a book entirely about how the German modernists moved to the West Coast when the Nazis came to power.
Who brought them here?
Yeah.
OSS.
So, Dr. Bahr, he didn't have a very good answer, or he didn't really know himself as to why that would tend to happen. I brought it up very subtly. If you go back and listen to that interview, I recently listened to it again because I wanted to brush up on that information. But I brought it up to him that every person that he basically mentions there has some sort of connection to the government, and it's just these guys who particularly chose Southern California. So, of course, Adorno and Horkheimer moved out here to the West Coast, and so did Herbert Marcuse. So Adorno wanted to teach, they wanted to get jobs at like UCLA and things like this. Apparently they weren't, that didn't work out so well for them. But, the one thing I kept bringing up to Dr. Bahr is like, well, you're seeing the effects of kind of like what these guys wrote, right? Mm-hmm. And he said, yes, but that's not necessarily true. He's all, because they wrote those things, in the 1940s. He's like, so, they were writing those books and they weren't popular. I said, but don't you see that it became, the people who were growing up in the 1940s were teenagers in the 1960s.
Mm-hmm. But that's why Wilhelm Reich became popular in the 60s after his death, right?
Yeah, well, him too. Yeah, I mean,
I think it was the riots in Paris in '68. They were throwing copies of Mass Psychology of Fascism at the cops.
Yeah, he's arguably responsible for creating the beatniks.
Yeah,
without actually creating it, but yeah, I'd say and he's not a Frankfurt schooler, but just to use the example of
cultural Marxism. So
yeah, I'd say that what Reich precedes those guys, right? Mm-hmm. If I'm correct. Yeah,
he does. But his time is really the 30s and 40s. He dies, I think, 1959 or 60.
Yeah. So the ideas of Marcuse and Adorno and all those guys, even though they wrote all their dialectics of enlightenment and all that type of stuff in the 40s, you had all that time period for that stuff to be implemented into society.
Mm-hmm. And also the ever expanding university system at the time, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And Dr. Bahr just didn't seem to get it. He didn't seem to understand what we were trying to tell him. Other people who moved out here to the West Coast was Bertolt Brecht, Thomas Mann, architects, Richard Neutra, Adolf Schindler, Rudolf Schindler. There is an Adolf Schindler too, but Rudolf Schindler, Richard Neutra took over for Frank Lloyd Wright in the creation of modernist architecture. In fact, if you have ever seen a school in California, which this style doesn't generally proliferate out to where you're at, Tim, but Richard Neutra is pretty much responsible for building schools with classrooms that are outside.
Oh yeah, I used to watch 90210.
Exactly. Yeah, there you go.
The outdoor school. That's right. Yeah. Now there wasn't. That's just because of climate. There wasn't any social engineering associated with that, was it?
I'm not sure. You know, I've looked into that. I can't really find any evidence for it. Well,
the Freemasons, built the school system out there. They brag about it, don't they?
Oh, yeah. You can go down that route for sure. I know that Neutra was a theosophist of some sort, or he dabbled in theosophy, but basically the idea was that a lot of these guys, whatever it was, whether it was good or bad or whatever, is neither here nor there. It's that it was an overthrow of the old, right? And if you were to go into the history of like when they started to teach architecture, the one in particular I'm thinking of is Luckman Perriera, William Perriera, very famous. It looks like it's Perriera. I think it's Perea, but I've been pronouncing it Perriera for so long. Anyways, William Perea, very famous architect. He doesn't get a lot of grandstanding on his behalf, but he built the Transamerica Pyramid in San Francisco.
Okay.
And he built tons of stuff. He's responsible for what would be cultivated by the Rockefeller and the Museum of Modern Art, eventually known as the International Style of Architecture. So you could technically say the CIA funded this particular type of architecture because, interestingly enough, these guys would go over to Iran and Turkey and places like that and build their government buildings in this international style. Edward Durrell Stone was another architect. These guys had buildings all over Southern California. But I was looking into the history. Perea's partner, Luckman, he would, if I remember correctly, he went to school at USC. I might be mixing him up with another architect, but in any case, it was definitely USC, and they talked about how when the Bauhaus style came out, that basically all other types of architecture completely went out the window as far as curriculum was concerned.
Oh, it's just like the same function they did with art, with modern art. They kind of pushed aside.
They did, they just did that when Bauhaus and Le Corbusier and all those architects of functionalism,
Gropius,
Gropius, all that stuff all came out. The universities in the U.S. threw out all the old stuff and started teaching that stuff right away.
Yeah, no matter how badly flat roofs leak, they insisted on building flat roofs.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Which is kind of a microcosm of their whole way of organizing society. No matter how badly it leaks, the point is they got to build a flat roof.
Well, yeah, and like I was saying, all that stuff started out here in California to a certain extent, proliferated out to the rest of the world, and it was an overthrow of just whatever it was, whether it was good or bad before, it doesn't matter. You gotta get rid of it. You gotta throw it, and
well, houses started to look like factories, and they lost any.
Houses started to look like factories, and another thing that is very interesting about this, I think I've talked about this before, is that a lot of the major corporations would, of course, embrace this style of international architecture, including the aerospace and atomic industries. So William Perrier and Luckman and Neutra and all of these guys were commissioned by places like General Dynamics and Northrop Grumman. All those buildings were built by these modern architects. Okay. IBM, I think I've mentioned this before, employed Charles Ames to build the mainframe computer to look modern and to look like a human, to have a human quality to it, so that people would want to work in the office with the computer.
That's funny. Yeah, that's why they put the tapes on the front, like eyes or something.
Like eyes, yeah. And the where the punch card comes out is like a mouth.
Mm-hmm. It's like Robbie the Robot or something.
Yeah, they did that on purpose, and like I said, they employed modernist architect and furniture designer Charles Ames to do that. Same thing with the logos for all the for big corporations. Those type of things, the logos employed modern excuse me. I think the guy's name is Sid Bass to do the logos. Now here's the interesting part about all this. Most of that stuff, when it comes to modernism, is revered for the most part by artsy-fartsy liberals.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So someone like myself, I can, I've seen, houses by Richard Neutra in person, or Joseph Eichler, or any one of these people, and there's certain ones of those houses that I'm like, wow, this is really great. They, left this landscape here, and they put a lot of glass in, so it looks like the outdoors meets the indoors.
Mm-hmm.
I understand what that is, but in the other perspective is that this was a complete and total, cultural revolution, not only in just architecture, but in art and music and, the rest of it.
Mm-hmm.
It was a concerted effort. And then to think that this thing that is revered as this kind of cultural revolution and overthrow was completely embraced by the military industrial complex in corporate America is also a very interesting aspect,
mm-hmm.
don't you think?
Mm-hmm. You ever seen the pictures of the guys that work at Rand Corporation, their houses? It's
yes, absolutely. The one that's in Laurel Canyon.
Yeah, that's where these and all these modern, that kind of houses
mm-hmm.
you're describing. All this very, very modern, cold look to them.
Mm-hmm. I think Rand Corporation, Ocean Boulevard in Santa Monica. I've actually been to the Rand Corporation building many times. Not inside, but it's directly across the street from Santa Monica Civic Auditorium, where I used to make deliveries to sometimes. And so Rand Corporation is based out of Southern California as well, and the what was I going to say?
No, we're talking about the architecture.
This whole type of thing whether it's military-industrial complex. I was going to say the Rand Corporation building had some modern architecture as well. It's been redone since then, but I think when it first started, it was it had a modern face to it.
Does it still have the statue of the mushroom cloud out front, made out of chains? I think, is it chains or something?
It's made out of a ship chain, like a like a big naval vessel's chain, making a big mushroom cloud. Yeah, which is actually the only real mushroom cloud that's ever existed.
Because the ones we see were made at Laurel Canyon, the Lookout Mountain, right?
That's the closest thing to real mushroom cloud you're ever going to get, is one made out of a chain. But on that note, speaking of Rand, another thing that was out of Southern California was Ayn Rand.
That's right. Another refugee, right?
Yes, and Ayn Rand had her cult out there in the San Fernando Valley, and Atlas Shrugged is an interesting part of this time period too, especially during the 60s and the Cold War, and this development of this idea of individualism and I know I'm going to get a lot of flack from this.
Like Hank Reardon?
Because what's that?
Hank Reardon, the heroic businessman or something?
No, I'll always get somebody telling me, well, what are you against individualism, blah, blah, blah. Listen, I'm just being objective with this stuff. Mm-hmm. I'm looking at this objectively. Someone might come into these talks or something and they're libertarian or they're an anarchist or whatever it is. Okay. Whatever your philosophy is, as a listener, is neither here nor there. That you even would have to look at your own philosophy objectively and examine it. So, the idea of individualism is being used for a purpose at this time period. Okay? It's being used to cultivate the organizational culture, the businessman, the military-industrial complex, the Cold War. All of this type of stuff is used as a cult, and individualism is used as a cultivating tool to further this.
Yeah, you're smashing apart the old order into little pieces and sweeping them up and reforming something. It's yeah.
Yeah, so Ayn Rand, so if she was really against the establishment, which I don't believe she was personally. Wasn't she like an economics advisor to Nixon or something? I'll tell you this. My high school, when you were a senior, if you had an AP course, you read Atlas Shrugged. Okay? So, I go into college bookstores all the time, and there's Atlas Shrugs all over the place. You're still reading Atlas Shrugged when you go to college.
Yeah, it's the type of thing that would appeal to a 21-year-old or a 20-year-old who has no experience in real life. It's all, about...
Yeah, and even if the Marxists that the colleges are reading it to critique it or whatever, I don't know why they're reading it personally, but what it does is it provides you the, whether it's the Fountainhead earlier or Atlas Shrugged in the 60s, it's providing this kind of template and this kind of attitude that proliferates it proliferates the attitude that is going to push people forward into this business culture that is burgeoning at this point. Because people don't understand, too. I know you understand this, Tim, but a lot of people don't understand that the modern day business world as we know it really is only as old as the late 1940s.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't exist in that same thing. I mean, you had the robber barons and all that type of stuff, but that type of business world was limited to that group of people.
Yeah, and the idea of the corporation, I think, dates back to what the Santa Clara decision, or the Supreme Court decision, Santa Clara versus Southern Pacific. But that's the late 19th century. Just the whole idea of a corporation. Yeah,
absolutely. But it was like the corporate world and organizational culture is limited to that world. It's limited to banking and railroads, stocks and bonds and all that type of stuff. Now, as of post-World War II, you have organizational culture in everything that we do. Okay, so it's like if you go to your hardware store, there's going to be someone, your local hardware store, there's someone affiliated with it who wears a suit and tie and sits in a cubicle at some point, right? So organizational culture and businessman culture comes out of that time period, and it had to proliferate. And one of the ways it proliferated was through tech, military-industrial complex, aerospace, and then later on, and then at the same time, obviously on the East Coast, kind of the jet set Manhattan, I guess you could say what people would know as in the modern sense, kind of the things that you see on the Mad Men series or something like that, right? So this is all happening around the same time. Now, this is very interesting. I don't think a lot of people know this, but California, when it comes to libertarianism and individualism and that type of stuff, plays a very interesting role. And there's a book, it's called Radicals for Capitalism, a freewheeling history of the modern American libertarian movement by Brian Doherty. And I'm going to go through here. I don't know if you've ever heard me talk about this, Tim, but the libertarian movement has a connection to LSD.
Which ties it back to what? CIA.
So this chapter is called Objectivism, Anarcho-Capitalism, and the Effects of Psychedelics. Okay, so maybe if Joe Atwill listens to this, he'll get a kick out of this. So have you ever heard of spiritual mobilization?
Not sure.
Okay, so we can, maybe after this we'll dip our toe in the cults of California as well.
Yeah.
Spiritual mobilization was founded in Chicago in 1935 by Reverend James Fifield and two friends. They soon headed west and became the pastor of the First Congregationalist Church in Los Angeles, Leonard Reed's parish, during his days of running the LA Chamber of Commerce. Reed's pamphleteer pals, lawyer James Ingertston, and Southern California Edison executive W.C. Mullendore were also part of the flock. Spiritual mobilization's mission was inspired by a resolution that came out of a meeting of the General Council of the Congregational and Christian Churches in 1934, which called for the abolition of America's destructive free enterprise system. That's what the beginning of what Fifield saw as an evil social gospel, social action philosophy that came to dominate the Protestant National Council of Churches in the 1940s and 50s. He didn't want those anti-market heresies to spread unopposed. A trio of financiers from Spiritual Mobilization / FEE, right? And FEE is that libertarian...
Financial for Economic Education?
Yeah.
Okay.
A trio of financiers from the Spiritual Mobilization and Fee world, J. Howard Pugh, Jasper Crane, and B.E. Hutchinson of Chrysler, were high-level players on the National Lay Committee, a group of businessmen in the 1950s who fought a rear-guard action against the socialist trends they saw taking over American clergymen and churches. For a while, they tried to ensure that any pronouncement on political or social issues coming from the National Council of Churches would be vetted by the free market businessmen on their committee. Okay, after World War II, Fifield hoped that the climate would turn propitious for libertarian thought. He confided to his friend Norman Vincent Peale that his philosophy suffered a serious setback. When we entered the war, it seemed un-American to do anything but applaud everything that was done or said in Washington. When the war was over, he prepared a fresh burst of activity. He started the magazine Faith and Freedom in 1949, edited by anarcho-libertarian William Johnson, another veteran of Red Miller's operation in the Midwest. Okay, so Faith and Freedom was the first national journal to run a regular column by Murray Rothbard. Since Rothbard, under concerned eyes of his Volcker Fund handlers, was mindful of his future academic reputation as an economist, he wrote this column of fierce political opining under the pseudonym Aubrey Herbert. Okay. The editors and writers of Faith and Freedom were far more radically libertarian than their audience. Spiritual Mobilization had its enemies. I'm going to skip through here. So then it goes down to this quote: LSD steps up our voltage and frequency. To use the new vision thus made available, one must be able to plug in and get in tune. The fee/spiritual mobilization scene was made up of men who had climbed to the highest reaches of American business and society. They were aware, and acutely and sometimes painfully, that they were an embattled minority. Some were certain that civilization, as they valued, was descending into a dark age that might frightfully be long, even endless. Okay, hold on, I'm looking for this spot here where I'm going. So Leonard Read was the first libertarian in the circle of Fee, who was working at Fee, to know Gerald Heard. Do you know who Gerald Heard is?
No.
Okay. Read was a general devotee of semi-popular metaphysical literature, and Heard pervaded such literature in the 1950s. The gaunt Red Van Dyke sporting Briton wrote weird mystery tales and was erudite to the point of pain. He was the son of a high church Anglican and good friends and guru to Aldous Huxley.
Really? Well, that's...
He impressed everyone with his habit of answering questions with seemingly unrelated observations or questions. Okay, this is all taking place in California, by the way. I'm just making sure you know that. Heard had played the role of spiritual guru to British intellectuals, including Christopher Isherwood and W.H. Auden, in addition to Huxley. Heard became Inbretson guide through his strange new mystic dispensation and led him far beyond the set free market frontiers of what spiritual mobilization and the libertarian movement had been. Leonard Read was an interesting early surfer of the cultural wave, one that has not traditionally been associated with the ex-Chamber of Commerce men running a far-right propaganda outfit. A vaguely Eastern spiritualism had become linked in the 1960s with callow youth and hippies lost, alienated, desperate for guidance, but gaseous spirituality since the days of Madame Blavatsky and Annie Besant in late Victorian times if not before, was often a preoccupation of the well-to-do leisure class, which, come to think of it, the hippies and the 1960s kids also were. Mm-hmm. And Reed and his pals followed this tradition. Okay? Now we'll get down into the crux of it. Reed was not unique in this among his libertarian friends. His other friends at Fee were fascinated with Krishnamurti, and other Fee board members, along with Reed, found theosophists and metaphysicians from Rudolf Steiner to Alfred Denoy to Stuart Edward White and Franz Winkler endlessly worth delving into and contemplating. Okay. In the mid-1950s, are you ready for this? They would all gather at Bohemian Grove, a secretive nature retreat for the wealthy and powerful in Northern California. They'd kibitz with Herbert Hoover and Henry Hazlitt, swooning beneath the ancient trees and even more ancient stars, wondering how far consciousness and spirit and energy can evolve and grow, along with how to get the damn Eisenhower government to shrink itself. It was a heady time for them, and it got even headier. Gerald Hurd, along with his friend Aldous Huxley, and another friend, UCLA medical researcher Dr. Sidney Cohen, was not just a leading metaphysician, but also one of the leading Los Angeles evangels for mescaline and later LSD.
Yeah, so, yeah. So, is this a sub-project of MK Ultra, you think, or something?
I don't know what it is. All we know is... And then it talks about how Robert Heinlein was in this group, too, later. So on and so forth. So if anybody's interested in that stuff, I'm at... yeah, it goes into talk about, I'm not going to get into that, but it talks about how LSD, basically, these high-level libertarian guys in Fee were all taking LSD and hanging out with Huxley and Sidney Cohen. So, I thought you would think that was interesting there. This is all in and around UCLA and that area. These would be the type of people, which is another interesting thing that kind of cultivates in this. This would kind of connect in a certain way on one other side of another Southern California outfit would be the John Birch Society. And libertarians, to a certain extent, would connect more on that type. And interestingly enough, one of the things that the John Birch Society would kind of tout as being one of their big things that they kind of ran was the Manufacturers Association of America. Mm-hmm. And so, once again, you have these kind of guys who, you know, Chamber of Commerce, head of Chrysler, they're all kind of involved with this spiritual mobilization cult and and intertwined with, you know, the Fee outfit, libertarians.